Montana Territory, 1878. The wind chased dust across the dry valley floor, and Tessa Ellery's boots sank half an inch into the dirt outside the abandoned church, where she had taken shelter for the night. She pressed her back against the wall, rifle clenched tight in her arms, and listened to the silence. Not a bird in the sky, not a soul on the road, just the sound of her own breath and the soft snoring of her two children inside. She had not slept in 3 days. Her husband had left them a month ago, said he was heading to Helena for work, never came back. Then the landlord came, said the cabin was not theirs anymore. She packed what she could, took her daughter and son, and walked, no destination. Just away. Tessa glanced through the cracked wooden slats. Her daughter, Hazel, 6 years old, curled up on the church pew with her brother, Henry, who was just 4. Their faces were smudged with dust, their legs too skinny. She had not eaten since yesterday, and the children had only half a biscuit each. Tessa turned away and wiped her face. She had no more tears left, but the ache lived behind her ribs like a splinter she could not pull. She was 23, and already life had tried its best to break her. She did not expect to see a horse on the road. It came slow, walking steady, not rushed. The man in the saddle wore a wide hat, dust-coated clothes, and had a rifle slung across his back. When he saw her, he tugged the reins and stopped a good distance away. "Ma'am," he called out, voice low but clear. "You folks all right?" Tessa didn't answer. She stepped in front of the doorway, shielding the kids behind her. He waited, did not come closer, just sat there, letting the wind move around them. "I mean no harm," he added, hand raised from the reins. "Name's Clay Jensen, cowboy out of Livingston. I got some jerky and water if you need it." She stared at him. Tall, broad-shouldered, quiet eyes, not young, maybe 30, maybe older. The kind of man who had seen enough of the world to know better than to talk too much. Tessa lowered her rifle an inch. "We're fine," she said, even though her voice cracked. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you ain't, but I'll ride on if you want me to." Hazel peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, eyes wide. Henry followed, rubbing his eyes. When they saw the horse, their faces lit up just a little. Tessa hesitated, then stepped aside. Clay dismounted slow, his movements calm. He unslung his pack and opened it. From inside, he pulled a wrapped cloth and offered it to the children. "Dried apples," he said, "and some bread, you all eat." Hazel took it with both hands. Henry followed close behind. Tessa watched them sit on the pew and eat like they had not seen food in a week, because they had not. Clay handed her a canteen. "You too." She took it, drank 2 quick gulps, then caught herself. "Thank you," she said, voice quiet. He nodded once. "You headed anywhere?" "Just away," she said. He looked at the children, then back at her. "You got family?" "No," he waited a beat. "You got a plan?" She shook her head. Clay looked toward the mountains in the distance, then back down the road. "I got a place, couple miles west, small but it's mine. You can rest a few days, just rest." "No strings." Tessa narrowed her eyes. "Why?" He met her stare. "Because I was raised better than to let a woman and her children starve on the side of the road." She did not answer, but something in her chest cracked open a little. They rode together that evening. Clay gave her the saddle, held Henry in front of him and Hazel behind. They watched the sun dip low behind the hills, and she tried not to cry when she saw the small cabin tucked between cottonwoods, with smoke curling from the chimney. He had a cow, a few chickens, and a well with clean water. Tessa helped him cook. She washed the children's faces. Clay sat on the porch sharpening his knife, and when he looked over at her, something in his face softened. She tucked the children into bed, then stepped outside. The stars were out, and the wind was cooler now. Clay was still on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. "They asleep?" he asked. "Yes. You hungry?" "Not anymore." He nodded, and they sat quiet for a while. "You lost your husband?" he asked after some time. She did not nod. She did not speak. She just looked out at the dark trees. "I lost someone too," he said. "Years ago. I know how it feels." She turned her face toward him. "You have children?" "No," he said. "I wanted them though." Tessa pulled her shawl tighter. "I never thought I'd end up here, begging food off a stranger. Dragging my kids around like stray dogs." "You are not begging," he said firmly, "and you are not a stray. You are a mother, doing what you have to." She blinked hard, then looked away. "I know I do not look like much," she said, "but I work hard. I do not complain. I thought no man could ever want me again, not after all this." Clay set the knife down, looked straight at her. Then you were looking at the wrong men. She turned to him, surprised. I see you, he said. I see what you carry. And I do not scare easy. The silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of something else, something warmer. Tessa stood up. Good night, Clay, he tipped his head. Good night, Tessa. When she stepped inside, her heart beat a little different. The next morning, he had already milked the cow and set water to boil. Hazel clung to his leg as he walked, laughing like she had known him forever. Henry followed close behind, asking questions about the horse. Tessa watched from the porch, arms crossed. It had been a long time since she saw her children smile. 3 days turned into 5. She washed clothes. She helped him mend a fence. They spoke little, but when they did, it was never awkward. He taught Hazel how to hold a lasso. He lifted Henry onto the horse and walked slow circles. And every night they sat on the porch, the quiet between them turning soft like worn cotton. On the 6th night, after the children were asleep, she stepped outside again. Clay was there, as always, whittling something. What are you making? She asked. He held it out. A wooden horse. Carved simple but careful for Henry, he said, her throat tightened. You are good with them. He looked down. They are good kids. They think the world of you. I do not take that lightly. She stood in the starlight, looking at him. He stood too, but did not step closer. I do not know what happens next, she said. I do, he said. You stay if you want, she swallowed. Why would you want someone like me? He stepped forward now, just once. Close, but not too close. Because when I saw you standing in that church doorway, rifle in your hands, kids behind you, there was not a doubt in my mind. You are stronger than most men I have met, and kinder. She stared up at him, heart thudding, and then he leaned in, slow, giving her every chance to step back. She did not. Their lips met, soft and sure. Her first kiss in years. Her first kiss that felt like more than just lips. When he pulled back, she was trembling. He touched her cheek. You are not alone anymore, Tessa. She closed her eyes, held his hand against her skin. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. By the 2nd week, Tessa had memorized the rhythm of Clay's days. He rose before light, boots tapping the cabin floor with quiet purpose, and returned from the pasture with dew still clinging to his hat brim. He didn't speak much in the mornings, and she didn't press him to. He worked like a man with a debt to pay, though she'd never heard him speak of owing anyone, and he never let her lift more than she could manage. She started baking again. The flour was coarse and low in the sack, but her hands remembered the weight of dough, the way to turn it without bruising the rise. Hazel helped with the eggs, Henry with the firewood. Clay built a shelf for the bread to cool. He did it without asking. One evening after supper, Clay led the children outside to teach them how to read the stars. Tessa watched from the doorway, arms folded across her apron, the last of the day's heat still clinging to the porch rail. That one's Cassiopeia, Clay said, pointing. Looks like a crooked W, Hazel squinted. But what's she doing up there? Waitin' on winter, he replied. She comes out clearer when the cold sets in. Henry leaned his head against Clay's shoulder, eyelids drooping. Tessa stepped down and gathered him in her arms, his weight heavier than she expected. Behind her, Clay stood brushing sawdust from his trousers. You know much about the stars? He asked. Only the ones that never change, she said. He nodded. Those are the ones worth knowing. They didn't speak again until the children were asleep. She was sweeping the hearth when he came back in, shoulders dusted white from the barn's loft. He knelt down near the fire, feeding it small pieces of pine. I'm riding into town tomorrow, he said. Need to trade for seed, maybe wire, won't be long. She nodded, but didn't look up. You need anything? He asked. I could use a spool of thread, she said after a moment, and a needle that won't snap. He smiled faintly at the hearth. Color, whatever's cheapest. He didn't answer right away. Then, you'll be all right here. Tessa met his eyes for the first time that day. We've made it this far. He stood, brushing his palms together. I'll be back before supper. It wasn't the words that caught her, but the certainty beneath them. She rose early the next morning, packed him bread wrapped in oilcloth, and tucked it into his saddlebag without comment. Hazel brought out a drawing she'd made on a scrap of feed sack stick figures on a crooked horse and pressed it into Clay's hand. Bring it back, she said. I will. He touched the brim of his hat to each of them, then mounted up. Tessa stood with Henry on her hip. Hazel clutching her skirt, and watched until the dust settled behind him. Midday came quiet. The children napped, and she used the time to scrub the floor. Her bones ached, but the rhythm of the brush calmed her. Outside, the chickens scratched in the dirt, and the cow shifted lazily in the shade of the elm. The wind held a hint of fall. She found herself humming while stitching a tear in Hazel's dress. It surprised her. When Clay returned, the sun was low, and his horse was carrying more than supplies. He'd found a small sack of apples, not yet ripe but firm, and a bolt of blue cloth no thicker than a handspan. "I figured you'd make better use of it than the store shelf," he said, setting it on the table. She ran her fingers over the fabric. "You spent more than you needed to," he shrugged. "Money's meant to be used." Later that evening, once the children were asleep again and a breeze moved through the open window, she found him sitting on the porch steps. The sky burned orange at the edges. "You always come back," she said. He didn't turn. "I'm not a man who leaves." She sat beside him, resting her hands in her lap. "I used to think I was too much trouble to stay for," Clay exhaled through his nose. "Then someone made you believe a lie." She looked down at her hands. "He said I was soft-headed. That I wouldn't last a season without him." "I saw you carry 2 children across half a county," he said. "You're harder than any man I've trailed cattle with." The silence stretched, but it was no longer wary. She could feel the shape of something forming between them, not rushed, not fragile, just real. He didn't reach for her, didn't close the space between them, but he didn't have to. "I'm not asking for anything," she said, voice low. "I just don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said. "You're a choice, one I'd make again." This time, when she looked at him, there was no fear behind her eyes. She rested her head against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the weight of her settle there like it belonged. A late frost came through in early May, sharp enough to bite the buds off the apple tree behind the barn. Clay stepped out that morning with a wool coat over his shoulders, breath showing in the cold air. Tessa was already at the stove, coaxing a fire from last night's coals, her hair tied back with a strip of the blue cloth he'd brought home. Hazel sat at the table breaking dried corn into a bowl. Henry was quiet, curled near the hearth with a blanket drawn up to his chin. "He's warm, but he coughed in the night," Tessa said without turning. "I'll keep him near the fire." Clay stepped closer, crouching beside the boy. Henry's brow was dry, but his breathing was rough around the edges. "I'll fetch wild horehound," Clay said. "There's still some in the low draw if the frost didn't kill it. I'll be gone an hour." Tessa nodded but didn't look away from the pan. "Don't forget your gloves. The creek'll be stiff with ice still." He paused at the door. "You'll be all right," she glanced over her shoulder. "We need the leaves." "I'll be fine." The wind had teeth that morning, but Clay didn't linger. He knew the bend where the horehound grew, tucked between the rocks along the shaded creek bed. When he returned, his hands were stiff, and the sun had risen just enough to take the edge off the cold. Inside, Henry hadn't moved much, but Hazel had set out a little tin cup and was spooning honey into it with great care. "I told her it helps the bitterness," Tessa said, pouring hot water into a bowl steeped with the leaves. "She said she wants to stir it till it's ready." Clay set his gloves down and leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene quietly. "She's got your stillness," he said. "Keeps her hands steady." Tessa didn't answer right away. She dipped a cloth in the water and wrung it out, then pressed it gently to Henry's chest. "She never had much choice. Things were always shifting under our feet. I think she just decided to root herself." That night, Henry's breathing eased. Tessa didn't move from his side. Clay brought her a blanket from his bed and laid it over her shoulders. When she looked up, her eyes were rimmed red, not from tears, but from hours without blinking. "You should sleep," he said. "I will, after he does." He didn't press her. Just sat down near the fire and began mending one of Hazel's boots, the sole peeling loose at the toe. The lamp cast a soft pool of light, and the wind rattled the window pane, but inside the cabin there was warmth that held. By the 4th day, Henry was sitting up, playing with a carved wooden cow Clay had made from scrap pine. Hazel ran outside to gather eggs, and for the first time since the frost, Tessa stepped out into the yard without glancing back toward the door. Clay was trimming fence posts near the edge of the pasture. She crossed the field slow, her skirt brushing the wild grasses starting to green again. When he saw her, he set down the saw and wiped his palms on his trousers. "He's better," she said simply. I saw. They stood together in the shade of the ash tree, the leaves just starting to unfurl. "I used to be proud of how little I needed," she said after a while. "But lately I've been thinking, what's the point of surviving if you're always cold inside?" Clay didn't speak, but he turned to face her fully. "I was afraid," she went on. "Not of being alone, I've done that before, but of needing someone again. Of wanting something I couldn't carry by myself." He stepped closer, not touching, just near enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. "I don't want to be a burden," she said again, but this time her voice wavered on something softer. "You're not," he said, his voice low. "You're a woman who's done more than most ever have to, wanting peace after that. That's not weakness." She looked down at her hands, roughened from work, and then at his. Theirs were not the kind of hands made for poetry, but they'd built warmth out of nearly nothing. "You said once I was a choice," she said. "Is that still true?" "I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't." She nodded slowly, then reached out and took his hand. Not bold, not timid, just certain. He held it like he'd been waiting to. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside him on the porch, the stars clearer than they had been all season. The frost had passed, and the air smelled of thawed earth and wood smoke. "I think I could make a dress out of that blue cloth," she said, "for Sunday. Not that we go anywhere, but still." "I'd like to see that," he said. "I know it won't be easy, this life, not with me and 2 little ones." "I already built the fence stronger," he said. "That's for keeping in goats or children." "Whichever comes first," she laughed, and it shocked her how easy it came. He turned toward her, quiet again. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "Not just a roof and walls, a home, with you." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She leaned into him, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath it. "I never thought I'd be wanted again," she said. He looked at her, eyes warm. "You're not just wanted, you're loved." She closed her eyes, let the words settle deep. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like borrowed space. She felt like she'd come home. The cabin roof needed rethatching before the rains came, and the ladder Clay had built from pine poles creaked under his weight as he worked. Tessa stood below, one eye on Hazel gathering kindling near the chicken coop, the other on Henry chasing a grasshopper across the soft dirt under the clothesline. "Pass me the next bundle," Clay called down, steadying himself against the ridgepole. Tessa tied the thatch with twine and handed it up. "You're favoring your left foot again. Boot heels wearing crooked," he replied. "I'll mend it when I'm down." She watched him tamp the dried reeds into place, arms moving with practiced care. A gust of wind caught the hem of her apron, and she held it down with one hand, eyes narrowing at the sky. "Clouds are thickening," she said. "You've got a couple hours, maybe." He nodded without looking down. By mid-afternoon, the air had turned heavy and the light shifted. Tessa brought the children inside while Clay finished the last corner of the roof. The first drops fell just as he stepped off the ladder, boots hitting the packed earth with a dull thud. Inside, she laid out dry clothes and poured hot water into the basin for his hands. He peeled off his damp shirt and stepped to the washstand, steam rising faintly as he scrubbed the grit from his palms. "I found a little book in the barn loft," Hazel said from the table, holding up a thin volume with frayed edges. "It's got someone's name inside." "Lydia Jensen." Clay dried his hands and stepped closer, brows drawing low. "That was my mother's. She kept it for verses and such." Tessa looked up from where she was threading a needle. "You never mentioned her name before." "She died young," Clay said. "Before I ever grew tall enough to reach the stovetop. That book's about the only thing of hers I kept." Hazel opened the cover gently and traced a finger along the faded handwriting. She wrote in small letters. She was small herself, he said. But she had a voice that filled the house. Tessa set her sewing aside. What was she like? Clay leaned one shoulder against the post, eyes somewhere farther off than the room. Kind, quick to laugh. She could take the skin off a man's pride with just a look, but she never raised a hand in anger. Henry climbed into his lap then, settling against his chest with the ease of a boy who'd learned safety from habit, not hope. Clay wrapped an arm around him and met Tessa's gaze across the room. "She'd have liked you," he said. The words settled deep. Tessa didn't reply, but her eyes held something steady and certain. Later, after the children were in bed and the rain tapped gently on the windows, Clay pulled a small tin box from the shelf above his bed. He sat beside the fire and opened it slowly, revealing a few folded papers, a broken watch chain, and a slender silver ring with a worn band. He held it out. It was hers. I've kept it through every trail and winter since. I thought I'd never have cause to give it to anyone. Tessa took it, careful not to let it slip. The metal was cool, but her fingers warmed it quickly. It's beautiful, she said. It's yours if you want it. She looked at him, the firelight catching the hollow of her throat. You're sure? I've never been more. She slipped it on. It fits, snug and quiet, like it had been waiting. I don't have much to give in return, she said. You gave me your trust, he said. That's more than most ever offer. He reached for her hand and she let him. They sat like that until the fire burned low, the hush of the rain outside folding around them. Neither spoke of the days before they met. They didn't need to. Everything they carried had already found its shape in the life they were building, slow and rooted, like the cottonwoods behind the barn, deep enough now that no wind could tear them loose. The summer wedding was quiet. No preacher, no pews, just the cottonwoods in full leaf. A hand-carved cross Clay had shaped from fence remnants, and the sky wide and still above them. Hazel wore a crown of wildflowers she'd arranged herself, and Henry clutched a corn-husk doll Clay had whittled into a bride and groom for the occasion. Tessa stood in a dress she'd sewn from the last of the blue cloth, a soft cream apron tied over it, her hair braided and pinned with care. Clay wore his cleanest shirt and the coat he hadn't put on since spring. He shaved for the first time in weeks, and Henry had watched the whole thing in silence, eyes wide at the transformation. They spoke their vows beneath the trees, hands joined, voices steady. No one else was needed. Hazel tugged Tessa's skirt afterward. Does this mean we're all Jensens now? Tessa smiled. It means we're a family. That evening, Clay cooked over an open fire while Tessa peeled apples. She'd found a small patch of rhubarb near the creek and baked it into a tart with a pinch of sugar she'd saved for something special. Hazel insisted on setting the table with the chipped tin plates, and Henry folded his napkin in half perfectly, then refused to unfold it. Clay raised his tin cup. To a home that didn't come easy, and to the woman who made it worth the fight. Tessa clinked her cup to his. To the man who gave us roots. That night, after the children were in bed and the fire had burned low, they sat on the porch side by side. The moon threw pale light across the yard, and the breeze lifted the edge of her braid. Clay slid his arm around her shoulders. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't let me stop that day? I do, she said. And then I stop. Because it didn't go that way. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. You gave me a reason to come back every day. She leaned into him, fingers laced with his. You gave me a place to stay. Through August, the days grew long and gold with sun. Tessa planted beans and squash in the kitchen garden Clay built beside the shed. They taught Hazel to read from Lydia Jensen's old book, and Henry began counting fence posts in the pasture, loud and proud, even if he missed a few numbers along the way. One evening, Clay returned from town with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Tessa opened it carefully at the table. Inside was a length of soft muslin and a tiny pair of leather shoes, no bigger than her hand. She looked up, eyes wide. I figured we'd need them, Clay said. Come spring. She pressed her hands to her belly, quiet and full of wonder. You knew, you've been humming in the mornings, he said. And you haven't touched coffee in 2 weeks. She laughed, then cried a little, and he held her until the kettle whistled. Autumn came in slow layers, first the yellowing of the cottonwoods, then the geese overhead. Clay harvested what they'd planted, and Tessa preserved what she could. Hazel wrote her name proudly on the side of the woodshed with a piece of charcoal. Henry insisted his new sibling would be named after the horse. They spent the winter preparing. Clay added a cradle beside their bed, and Tessa stitched tiny shirts by lantern light. The snow came early, but the cabin held firm. Clay checked on the roof twice a week, and the fire never went out. The baby arrived on a still March night, small and strong, with a cry that wrapped around them like a thread. A girl with Clay's wide-set eyes and Tessa's quiet mouth. They named her Lydia. Hazel held her first, grinning so wide her cheeks hurt. Henry followed, serious and gentle, then announced he would teach her to ride. Tessa rested with the baby in her arms, the rest of the world falling away. Clay sat beside her, hand resting on her knee. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed," she whispered. He kissed her brow. "You've given me everything." Outside, the snow began to melt, and the first shoots of green pressed through the cold earth. The wind softened, and the sky opened wide again. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, warm and steady, and the family it sheltered sat close, wrapped in the kind of peace that comes only after hunger and heartache have been answered with love and permanence. They stayed, together. Always.